All right, 1, 2. All right, it's live. I guess I should start.
Yes.
All right. Welcome everyone. Thanks for coming, and also for those of you joining the live stream. So the topic of today, I'll be talking about the work we've been doing at ReviewPad on this idea of fluid pull requests and a new way to basically contribute to code bases. So I'm Marcelo Souza. I'm the CEO of the company, and I just want to talk a little bit about me. So I've been for the last 15 years or so on a mission to help anyone safely contribute to any code base in minutes, right? So I'm a software developer. I've been coding for a long time, or some time, and every time I join a new company or I go to a new code base, it takes sometimes a lot of time to open a pull request, and then you have to wait a couple of days. In some companies, a couple of weeks. In open source, a couple of months maybe. And so this is a kind of mission. So I've basically had 3 different hats in the past 15 years. First, I was an academic, so I was very fortunate to go to some universities. I studied in north of Portugal, and then I moved to the Netherlands, and then to the England, where I did my PhD in formal methods, so trying to analyze concurrent software automatically. And then I also went to some good companies, some well-known like IBM, Google, Microsoft, where I was basically building either compilers or static analyzers. And then I went, before starting ReviewPad or taking a path on my entrepreneurial path, I was at a company called SonarSource out of Switzerland. And what they do is a code quality tool called SonarQube that analyzes the code bases and finds technical debt, reliability, bugs, maintainability, and also security vulnerabilities. So this is essentially about me, about my past. And so the topic of today is this idea of pull requests. So pull requests are widely used in the industry, in the software industry today. And the agenda for today is to try and tell you why pull requests can be a superpower, but they are not. And how? So how can we actually provide the best pull request experience for all the developers, since everyone is using this idea of pull request, this methodology, and then what we can do about it. So, and the what is really about how can we get intelligence and personalized automations in your pull request experience. So, pull requests are about team collaboration, and at the core of it is really about Git branching. So I just want to kind of give you an analogy and a couple of examples. And I'm going to introduce the team. So we have Robin Full and Cat Stack. So this is basically the 2 developers, for example, working together. And the idea is that they use Git, right? So in Git looks something like this. It's a DAG, it's a directed cyclic graph. And when we have nodes and you have edges between nodes, and then you have some particular nodes which are commits, essentially, which are special, and these are the Git branches, right? So Git branches are nothing more but special commits in your Git structure. And so here we have 4 branches. So we have the main branch, typically what some people also call the master branch. Then you have what is known as the feature branches, right? So the branches that come off of the main branch. So in this case, we have the bug 334, we have the feature 292, and here I'm just alluding to the fact that you typically have some track, some Jira or some GitHub issues, and you have ticket numbers, and you typically want to have some convention on your Git branch so that it reflects what you're working on, what the developers are working on. You also have what are known as the long-lived branches sometimes, like stage could be, or like some particular environments. And so essentially you have this sort of structure that Kat and Robin are working on. And so what typically happens is a developer starts working on a bug, for example. So he takes the main branch, creates a feature branch out of it, and puts a commit there, and then creates another commit, which is now the bug 400. And then typically what comes is, okay, Robin comes to play and say, okay, I want to propagate the changes from my feature branch into the main branch. This is a typical scenario that exists, right? And the developer needs to wait a little bit, right? Because there is a kind of blockage, and Cat comes and says, well, I need to verify these changes. You cannot just put whatever you want into the main branch. We actually need to stop. And this is what is known as the Git merge procedure, right? So the procedure of merging a feature branch into another branch, in this case, the main branch. And at the core of it, you don't need to use pull requests for doing Git merges, but typically it's important to understand the history of where pull requests are coming about. And so what are really pull requests? Pull requests are a mechanism that was popularized by GitHub to help merge these feature branches, okay? So this is fundamentally why pull requests were created. And there is three main advantages of using pull requests. The first one is that it actually gives you an interface to review, where you can actually visualize the Git difference between the branches. And then you can discuss, so you can comment on the code and suggest changes. So this before pull requests, I'm from the time where still today, if you want to do a change to Linux kernel, you send the patch over email, go to the email thread, and good luck. And then you find a way to get things upstream and so on. And this is kind of in the past now. For a lot of people coming out of university or junior developers, they even associate Git with GitHub, right? It's the same thing for them. And the third one is really that you want to be able to control the merge procedure, right? So a pull request is really a mechanism where you want to say, well, I'm going to run for example, some CI, some continuous integration checks, and I want to make sure that the merge only happens when some of these CI checks are green. But what's really the core of using pull requests? Why they became so widely spread? They became widely spread because they are used in open source projects, right? So when you have in GitHub, when you started, you have this idea of open source where you want to receive contributions from other people, but you don't know who these people are. So you need to have a way, and GitHub came up with this idea of forking and creating pull requests out of the forks, such that people could accept contributions from what's so-called untrusted parties. Right, so fundamentally, a pull request is a mechanism for incorporating changes from people that you might not even know who they are, and then you need to wait to verify those. So that's really about the history of why pull requests came about, why they are so popular. And now you may answer, okay, how popular are pull requests? And so I went and did historical analysis of pull requests. So this is in log scale. So these are orders of magnitude difference since 2012 up to 2021. And what you basically see is an exponential growth on the number of pull requests used, right? So so nowadays we have about, I would say, on open source projects, at least 50 million pull requests being created every year, right? So it's an enormous amount of contributions and of pull requests being used. And so what we also know is from GitHub itself, the data, that into 2021, there were on the entire ecosystem of GitHub alone, 170 million pull requests merged, right? So this is what we know. So in the time that I'm giving this talk, there's probably like 15,000 pull requests that were merged in this process. So it's a crazy activity that is happening all the time on GitHub. So what I also want to allude is that even according to GitHub, on average, every single pull request has a wait time of at least 1 hour. So what is the wait time? The wait time is a time that developers wait for each other before they can merge. And so this basically means that we have at least 170 million hours in total of time where the system, the system being like the code in the world, so if you see it as a gigantic code base, is being stuck. So think of this mental image where you have, every time you want to do something, you have to stop and get it verified. And you have to kind of do all this. And so this is crazy, especially, for example, if you consider the amount of time we are spending on reducing the CI times. So like sometimes the first thing a developer experience team does in a bigger company is, okay, what are CI times? Maybe half an hour per pull request. Let's try to get it down to 5 minutes. But then they don't reduce the number of time people are waiting for each other. So overall, the number of times you can get code to production is still the same. The deployment frequencies is the same. And we measure this over and over again, this phenomena of we are trying to do a micro optimization and we're not optimizing the entire process, which is basically the collaboration between developers. So how is the pull requests used today? Pull requests are used today in this sort of what's known as the DevOps movement, right? So DevOps movement in the last 10 years or so. So they're really kind of the backbone of the CI/CD, like the continuous integration, continuous deployment best practices. And they're used more than the things I showed you before. They're really used for 3 different purposes in an organization, in a company. Document developers' work. To automate things, so to automate running CI, running checks, making sure the build is always green. And also as audit mechanisms, to make sure that you don't put a secret in your code base, for example, that your commits are properly structured in case there's an audit of the code. And so there's, again, 4 different steps. People typically open a pull request. There is a continuous integration running. You have the code review actually happening. Then you actually do the merge, and then you deploy. This is typically why and how pull requests are being used today in a lot of companies. And this is what we see. So if you actually take a look at the workflow itself, and this may sound very familiar to you, as soon as you open a pull request, the first step that happens typically is you trigger some CI system, right? You trigger some Jenkins pipeline, you trigger some GitHub actions, and then you have to wait for that to run. Then you go to the review step. So you basically assign someone to review the code for you. Then you typically have to wait, and there is a kind of rework, right? So if you get some comments back, and then you start over again. You make some changes in the code, then you push, and then you trigger again the CI, you get another review iteration, and then you get some rework done. And this is kind of a cycle, right? It's kind of a loop of the pull request experience. After a while, you get into this sort of a fixed point where you get this approval. So you get all the thumbs up. So you get the approval, and after that, you actually can do the merge, right? So this typically is the sort of the workflow that millions of developers are going through on a daily basis all the time. But if you go back to this image, we started as, you have 2 developers. One just wants to make the changes from their feature branch into the main branch, and the other one is saying, I need to stop. And what fundamentally is happening here is that we are using this low trust mechanism, which is a pull request, where you always have to stop the developer from doing that and go through that process. And what this does, it makes, for example, in the review step, you wait for the other developer. And then on the rework, you are waiting for the actual developer that did the change. So you are waiting for the reviewer, then you're waiting for the developer, then you're waiting for the reviewer. So it's really kind of a ping pong between people. And so Robin, after a while, and I've experienced this to talk with hundreds of developers, after a while, Robin gets fed up with the pull request process in the sense that it goes over the same process for every single PR. It doesn't matter if you change a README or if you change the most important function in your code base, you go through the same process. And this is really at the core of what we're trying to say. It's like, it doesn't make sense if you are doing a very low risk change to go through the same process of review and getting your changes merged than if you're doing a very fundamental change in your code base. And at the core of it, it's because the trust, in a team, you're working with people for over years sometimes. You have trust relationships. The trust between Robin and Kat as developers is being undervalued, right? Because you're using this pull request mechanism really as a way to kind of block each other, right? So regardless of the change, you don't really value the trust between people. And so the idea of what we're basically saying is pull requests are being widely misused, right? They have a purpose, a very clear purpose when you don't know where the contributions are coming from. But if you're working in a team and you're using pull requests in the same way people are using it in the open source world, you're going to get artificial bottlenecks. And we are starting to see that over and over again. So pull requests are supposed to be a superpower, but they're becoming a super bottleneck, right? So if we see, especially in larger organizations, we start to see, metrics around, the cycle time. So the time it takes from developer starts working on something to gets into production. We start seeing things like average time to production of 9 days, and 7 of them are spent on code review. Fundamentally, just on waiting. Like you open a PR today, everything is okay, but you get a review in 3 days, and the review is just a thumbs up. And so it's a frustrating process. The second thing we start to see is developers, because they have to do this regardless of the changes, they start to become desensitized to actually the process of code review, right? And all these memes of, okay, 10 lines of code change, 10 bugs, 500 lines of code, looks good to me. Because developers fundamentally don't really sometimes believe in the code review process as it's been done on the pull request. And we can see this in a very simple metric. We start measuring in companies, how many reviews are LGTM, looks good to me. These are just that reviews where you just get an approval. Like, you open a PR, 30 seconds later, you get the approval. You know that this person didn't do a code review. And we start understanding, okay, if you look at all the code reviews done in the pull requests, what percentage of them are kind of useless? 50 to 90% of them in many organizations, which is crazy. Like, basically, you're saying that you are stopping people for no good reason. So actually, code reviews in this case have what I call negative value, because developers are just waiting for nothing, just waiting to get like some thumbs up. We've heard of cases like, you are in an open office, you need a review, you need an approval, you just shout, can someone give me a thumbs up? And then you get the reviews to merge something, right? So it's all these anecdotes that we see over and over again, just shows you that fundamentally managers don't value code reviews are not being done in the right way, and it's because people are using pull requests in a way that it shouldn't be used. The third one, which I actually think is perhaps the most important reason in a way, is that it's starting to lead to higher developer frustration. If you're working in a company where it takes you weeks, and sometimes, at least weeks on average, to actually get something done, a small change in a button on a web application, because of the pull request process, because of the PR, after a while, developers will find other companies to work for. And we've seen this, like, we talked with a lot of developers, and they basically said, yeah, like, if I cannot be productive, if I don't feel productive, I'm just waiting for people and having meetings, then I'm not happy. So developers are being stopped for no good reason. So this was the why, and why they should be a superpower, and why they are becoming a super bottleneck. And then now it's really about the how. How can we fix this? So you can take one spectrum of the solution for people that are, for example, doing trunk-based development. So they don't even believe in future branches. They just believe in like commit to master, which is, the father, David Farley is the father of continuous deployment. He's going to say, has all these YouTube videos about don't use pull requests, period. If you're in an organization where you're not doing mob programming or pair programming, and you're just, working on your own, and then you open a PR and then you get some feedback, this is not the right way of doing software development. I think that what we are saying is not that, and it's really the inception of why pull requests need to be more fluid and not so strict as they are. So let's go back to understanding what's happening. So what we want is a process in a workflow between developers where Robin, in this case one of the developers that made the changes, doesn't have to go through the same process for every single PR. So let's take a look at some scenarios. The first scenario is Robin does a minor documentation change. In that case, it should be possible for Robin to say, this change doesn't require a code review. So I should be able to merge my changes into production without having to have an approval. In the second scenario, for example, what you want to deprecate an API. You're deprecating an API. And it's OK. And this is where sometimes developers start getting their minds blown, which is it's possible that you can do a code review after you merge the code. So it's possible to go into this workflow, and now instead of you having this like review, rework, approve, merge, what you have is really, you trigger the CI is green, it gets approved automatically by a system, then you merge it, and then you can review it later, right? So the fact that you are using pull requests doesn't mean that you need to review your changes before the changes get merged. By the way, feel free to stop me if you have any questions. In the third scenario, you might want to actually strengthen the process. So suppose that you're doing a critical database migration, very common scenario where a lot of code reviews don't provide any value because they don't find out the issues, and then you find them in production. Actually, what you want in this case is to have a system that says, okay, if you're doing a critical database migration, I want to automatically have a way to say, I need an extra reviewer. So I need to add someone else into this picture, so another person, to actually give me both approvals before I can actually merge the changes. Someone, for example, from the security team, or from someone actually masters how these things should be done. So this is really about the idea of fluid pull requests. So what are fluid pull requests? They are an extension of pull requests with a predefined set of rules that can automate all these manual actions. For example, when should you get a review before you can merge? If you need to get a review, who should be the right person to review it? Do I need multiple reviewers to get it? And the fundamental value that we want to provide is we want to have a consistent and transparent pull request experience that minimizes this wait time between developers, right? So when a developer goes into a pull request, they know they are wanted there. So it's not like that situation, which is very frustrating, for example, where I go to someone asks for a review, I go and the CI is red. It's frustrating because the first thing you're going to do is, okay, thanks for changing my context to come back here and simply say, please fix the CI. So you shouldn't get to that point, right? You should have something that helps you to say, no, when I go there, I know that the CI is going to be green, at least that, because otherwise my review is very basic. So what are the benefits for you, the developer? We believe there's fundamentally 4 benefits. You wait less, so you are more productive. More importantly, you actually do code reviews that matter to you, right? You are not doing these kind of code reviews that you know that they are meaningless. You are just kind of going through the code, you know it's okay. Sometimes you don't even are the right person to review the code to get it merged, but you could just use it to like have a context in terms of knowledge sharing. You can actually focus on the process instead of the actual review itself. Like you can focus on what's the better process for my team. If in my team I have this part of the code base which is critical, I need to change the way we make changes into that part, as opposed to having the same sort of security for both parts. And fourth, which is I think something quite important for a lot of developers, is to have a consistent experience when it comes to pull requests. I talk with some developers that say, yeah, I open a pull request at 9 a.m. I don't know if it's going to be the same experience if I open it after lunch. It depends on what's the right person, who is the person who's going to review my changes. Typically, I'm going to choose this person because they are typically nice, they make good comments. So you start to have all these biases coming into it. And sometimes developers are very scared. I remember the first times I go into a company and a new code base, the first few pull requests are kind of like, okay, I'm going to be judged. This is not a cool experience for me. So what are the benefits for the team overall? So the benefits of the team, more from a kind of management perspective, is really about, okay, you actually can get people to be faster, so you have shorter development cycles. You can increase the security of the process because you know that people, when they're reviewing the code, they're reviewing for a reason. You can actually embed the compliance and the security into the PR itself, right? So you know that the consistency of the pull request process is going to be compliant. Very simple example is, I know that my commit messages are always going to be structured. I'm not going to have a commit message with a dot, which means nothing to anyone. And fourth, if you combine all this idea of, developers are, less blocked, developers review the code in a better way, you actually get higher code quality, right? Because you actually have code reviews that provide changes to the code that are meaningful. So now to the cool part, I hope. What are we really talking about when it comes to the experience? How can we change this experience? So I want to present a little bit about what we've been building at ReviewPad. So what is ReviewPad? ReviewPad is a GitHub app. It's a service for teams to implement this idea of fluid pull requests. You don't need to use ReviewPad for this. For example, there is this methodology of ship, show, ask, where people basically have the trust in their team to say, okay, we agree on my team that we have 3 types of pull requests. The ship pull request, where when I open a PR and I tag it with ship, I'm going to merge it immediately, and people trust me. I'm going to have the show pull request, where I merge it, but I'm going to ask a review after the merge, or the ask, which is, I did some changes, I opened a pull request, and I'm not sure if I should merge it before I get someone's feedback. So what's changing in this, for example, this methodology is that you are giving the developers the power to say, okay, I know what I'm doing 100%, and I know that I don't need to get a review to get these changes merged, versus the opposite, which is, I know what I'm doing, but I'm unsure if I need some second pair of eyes to actually give me some more confidence. So what is ReviewPad? ReviewPad is, again, a service on GitHub where you write a specification on your GitHub repo, and in there you can basically specify a series of automations based on the specification. For example, who is the right person to review the changes? What kind of labels should I add? Can I automatically merge based on the type of changes or not? The core library is open source, so we have open sourced the main library. And what it allows you to do is a smooth transition from, if you're just using pull requests, and now you want to say, for example, very simple scenario. If I change this part of the docs, this type of pull request can automatically be merged. Or if my pull request was created by a dependent bot, or something that's taking care of dependencies, like just a bot, I want to just make sure that if the CI is green, auto merge after that. Right? So it allows you to basically specify these automations. So let's look at a simple example of this specification. So the first example is really about auto-merging pull requests. So for example, suppose that you want to say, if my pull request only touch markdown files, so I'm specifying that in a specification language where I say I have a workflow, auto-merge documentation changes, and I want to run the following automation. If I only have file extensions.md, then merge the PR. Right? So the idea here is really like, if the developer only opens a PR with these kind of changes, I don't need to go through a review. I want you to merge it automatically. What can you do as well? For example, automatically assigning reviewers. So for example, I only want to say that I want to assign a code reviewer 1, and I want to only do that if the pull request is not in draft and if the description is different than empty. So I'm not even going to do anything. I'm not going to bother anyone with a review unless the PR is ready to be reviewed and you actually put a description there. So this is what you can specify. So it's really an ecosystem where you can specify all these workflows. It gets more and more complicated as you are implementing it. So let me give an example of that. So suppose that you essentially want to say, so you can also specify groups of people. So for example, what I can say is there is a compliance lead, which is, for example, Marcelo, like me, and I want to have a couple of rules. So rules are just predicates, Boolean predicates over the pull request. For example, if it touches the license, so if the pull request touches the license, the rule touches license will be true. And if it's not a core author, so if it's not Marcelo changing the license, then the not core author will also be true. So what can you do? You can say, okay, if someone touches the license and it's not Marcelo, I actually want to block the merge. I want to actually have something that says to the author of the PR, you did something that is not supposed to do. Right? So you want to protect your license from being changed by people that you don't want to change. And what you can do is you can hook review pads with the branch protection mechanism of GitHub and say, okay, if the status check of review pad fails, then I want to block the actual merge. So we are really preventing the developers from putting something into your code base that you don't want to happen. And that's basically what happens, right? So in the pull request interface, you have the review pad bot. It will put a comment there, and then you see the CI is red, and then you cannot actually merge. The merge button will be blocked. So let me show you then just another simple example of some of the things you can do. So here's on the right, you have a piece of code, and this, for example, is part of the diff. It's in Go code, so we use a lot of Go. And what you can do with ReviewPad is to also annotate the code with this code comment, ReviewPad N of annotation, saying that this function is critical. And then what this does is say, okay, suppose now I have a pull request that touches this function. For example, changes the error handling on the if error different than nil. What you can do now is to say, okay, I want to have a review process that if a developer touches this function, I want to have a dedicated process for reviewing those changes. How can I enforce that automatically? You can enforce that with basically our workflow system. So there is a built-in, which is called as annotation. So if as annotation critical, so if you're changing something which was annotated with critical, then I want to add a label saying, okay, this is a P2 thing. I want to assign a reviewer from the group owners, and I want to add the information on the pull request saying, Marcelo, there are critical changes. And this basically what you're doing is you're connecting your code with a different review process. And the thing is smart enough to understand what are the actual changes in your code base. The other thing we are building is essentially helping developers with the newest things on AI, right? So for example, what you can do is you can get automatically summarization of the code. So when you open the PR, you typically have immediately a summary of the changes, and then you also have some explainability of the code changes, which I'll show you in the demo. So let's just look at how this actually works so that you can get a better sense of what's actually we're talking about. So I'm just gonna go here. So here I have a basic GitHub repo, which I call Chatty. So basically here what I'm doing is a kind of pet project. I'm just creating AI agents in Golang so that you could communicate with them on Discord or Slack. Basically have like, ChatGPT inside of Discord or Slack. You don't actually need to want to do that. And essentially, as I said, you have the review pad YAML. So this is the specification. And I want to show you what this actually is trying to do. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to handle the dependency changes of this repo. So I'm saying, for example, okay, I'm defining groups of people. I'm saying, okay, what are the bots that manage the dependencies? There are 3 bots: Dependabot, Renovate, and Engineering Alpha. So these are essentially the GitHub handles that can open PRs that typically modify the dependencies in Go. This is our own. And then you also have the dependency managers. Dependency managers are basically the people that are supposed to manage the dependencies themselves. And then you also can specify what are my high-risk dependencies. And here I just specify the OpenAI. And then I can also specify what are the typical changes on the extensions when I'm modifying some Go dependencies. And I just the dot mod and the got sum. So what can you then do? You can do something like this. You can say, okay, if my pull request only contains file extensions from the Go system, so I'm only modifying .sum and .mod, then I can basically say, well, if I'm not changing any high-risk dependency, then I want to wait for the CI to be green, and then review pad should approve it and should merge it. So you are really kind of enforcing that, okay, if nothing bad is happening, if you just have a bot that you trust that is modifying a dependency that you don't consider high risk, as long as the CI is green, I don't even want to have developers looking at this. Else, if the build actually fails, then you want review pad as the bot to say, okay, request some changes, the build is failing. And then you want to add the developers as an assignee, right? And now the question is, was the author of the pull request a bot or not? If it was a bot, you want to add a human. If it was not a bot that created, you want to add the actual person to fix their mistake. Otherwise, you have basically a pull request which are modifying high-risk dependencies, and you want to automatically add a reviewer to approve, right? Because you're touching a dependency which is considered high-risk, and that's what you're basically doing. You're adding the reviewers. And so how does this look like? So let's just look at a couple of examples. So here, for example, I have a pull request, and in this pull request, I changed 2 files. So I have changed only the Go sum and the Go mod, and I've changed actually the OpenAI dependency, right? So I've changed a version of the OpenAI. And what is supposed to happen? So when I open this PR, review pad automatically, as the bot is the GitHub app, automatically adds Tiago as the reviewer. And it's going to say, okay, I have a report. Based on your specification, this pull request contains high-risk dependencies, and I'm adding a reviewer for approval. As opposed, for example, if you only are modifying very simple changes, let me just try to come up with an example here. Let me see if this one. You basically, I open a PR here. I'm not modifying a high-risk dependency. What happened here was I opened the PR, review pad waited for the CI to pass. As soon as it was green, it said all requirements are met. It auto-merged, and then the merge is done automatically. So you see here a pull request which has no human interaction except the author and the bot, right? So the bot is basically doing what it's supposed to do. So just to show you a very quick example of that in practice. So I don't know, let's, for example, go here to the Go sum, and I'm just going to open it, and I'm going to make a change. I'm going to commit as a new branch. So I'm just going to do this. And then, so in review pad, you have this, what we call some kind of commands, where you can say, for example, review pad summary. And what's going to do is when you create the PR, we are going to replace this with the actual comment generated by the AI. So now I'm going to create the PR. And as you can see, review pad is expected to run. It's running some other checks, and now the build is also running. It already updated me the description of the PR with the AI. It's telling me what's happening, right? So this pull request updates the Go mod. It increases the version of this API to the other, right? So it's as expected. You get a summary generated from the AI system, and it immediately says, okay, this PR contains high-risk dependencies, and I'm adding the reviewer for approval. So here I have a way to communicate with the system. And for example, one of the things you can also do in review pad is to actually get some code explainability, right? So I want to be able to say something like, okay, so review pad explain this line of code. And what I expect to get here is essentially review pad as the bot is going to try to understand this change and reply to me, which is typically what you sometimes do as a developer, right? You're in the code review process and you're like, I don't know why you did this. Can you explain it to me? But then you have to wait a couple of hours because the person might not reply to you immediately. So it's basically what we're saying is you shouldn't have to wait for getting those explanations. So you can do a lot of things with review pad. So we have, of course, in our website, you can go to products. And one of the things, for example, if you go to protect, there's a bunch of use cases here, how you can use review pad and automate a lot of actions to like basically do things like, okay, set up onboard new developers faster. So here what we are doing is we are essentially saying, okay, when a developer joins a company, I can specify what are the senior people for my team. So if I use GitHub Teams, so I'm specifying who they are. And then for every time a new author comes into the picture, I automatically assign the senior for their team. So if I'm the team DevOps, I say who is a senior for the team DevOps. And when I open a PR, I get this automatically assignment done for me. So I don't even need to understand who is the senior person I need to get the review from. So you can specify all these policies. And another thing you can do is you can also share policies across a lot of repos. So you can also come here. Let me just try to show you that. You can also extend policies. So I could have a policy that lives in another Git repo, like a core repo, and I just want to extend that so that I don't need to reuse. Suppose that I am using 50 GitHub repositories. I don't want to replicate my configuration for every single one of them. I want to be able to specify it once. And then on all the others, I simply extend the base configuration. And if I need to tweak it, I can overhaul the rules. So if I just go back to the thing we were showing, if I just refresh, I should get an explanation, right? So basically, the LLM came back and said, yeah, review pad came back with an explanation of what's going on, right? So you can basically have a conversation with the bot and get some, as you would have to, like, people are typically copy-pasting these to ChatGPT and then get some information. Here are basically providing that experience and enhancing it in a way that makes sense. And I think, going back to the presentation, it was what I wanted to show you today, right? So if you scan the QR code, you can get some more information about the review pad and this new idea of, you don't have to use pull requests as you are using all the time in open source. You can be much faster. You can get a lot more speed and a much better experience. Thank you.
Not sure if you have any questions or.
Is there questions from the?
I don't think so. No.
Okay, so we can just stop the live stream and go for some beers.